In the city of Neverwinter, a dwarf named Gundren Rockseeker asks our heroes to transport a wagon load of provisions to the rough-and-tumble settlement of Phandelver, for he and his brothers have discovered a map to the lost mine of Phandelver. On the road, however, our heroes discover, spoilers, Gundren and his warrior escort, Sildar Hallwinter, have been ambushed and kidnapped. The map? Stolen. Tracking down the goblins responsible and rescuing Sildar is easy enough, but rescuing Gundren will prove more difficult. It seems the dwarf has been taken elsewhere, to the sinister Cragmaw Castle. Venturing there, our heroes attempt to rescue Gundren, or at least recover his map from the clutches of the dreadful King Grawl. After that, there's only one thing left to do. Delve deep into the lost mine of Phandelver and confront the puppet master behind all of this, the conniving, dark elf wizard known as the Black Spider. The fate of Phandalin and Phandelver lies in our heroes' hands. That is the main quest of our adventure, and the subject of this video. Our story, like every story worth telling, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that is the order in which we'll look at things, examining each of the major plot points from the inciting incident all the way to the Dénouement. Champs-Elysées. Finally, we'll talk about what comes after the adventure. What do you need to know about the Shattered Obelisk? The, sequel to Lost Mine of Phandelver. It turns out, not much. Before we continue, this video will contain spoilers for the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but not the Shattered Obelisk. We will also be comparing the structure of this adventure to 3-act film structure, which is really quite simple. Act 1 just means the beginning, Act 2, the middle, and Act 3, the end. It is the structure used in many classic movies such as Star Wars: A New Hope and Disney's Mulan, both of which we will be using as reference points for story beats in this video. So, spoilers for those two movies as well. And finally, I just want to make clear, there are many valid ways to tell a story. This is just one way that has been shown to work. Tools, not rules! So without further ado, let's jump right into it, shall we? The inciting incident is the moment when the plot makes contact with the main character. In Star Wars, that is...
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
What's this?
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
In Mulan, that is...
Citizens, I bring a proclamation from the Imperial City. The Huns have invaded China. By order of the Emperor, one man from every family must serve in the Imperial Army.
For our story, it is when our heroes discover Gundren and Sildar's horses slain on the side of the road. This is the most important event in the story, and your players absolutely must understand what has happened. Because, to paraphrase Billy Wilder, most 3-act problems are just a couple of 1st-act problems in a trench coat. So don't be afraid to tell them, as the narrator, the dwarf who found the lost mine of Phandelver has been kidnapped, and the map to the mine was also stolen. I often see people posting online, saying something like, I want to skip the kidnapping and start the adventure with an epic dragon attack on Phandalin. And then, 2 weeks later, post, I don't know why my players aren't interacting with the main quest. Well, that's because you gave them an inciting incident for a different story. The inciting incident should be the first major action of the adventure, and it should clearly communicate to the players what the story is about. Or in other words, it should clearly communicate the central tension. Dramatic tension, also known as conflict, does not mean fighting or violence. It just means that someone wants something, and it's not guaranteed they're gonna get it. It can be as simple as a child taking her first steps, or as grand as a dark lord trying to destroy the universe. It is my opinion that every story needs conflict. As screenwriter Robert McKee once said, conflict is to storytelling what sound is to music. I've always found it easiest to define the tension using a yes or no question. In Star Wars, that is, will Luke Skywalker be able to rescue Princess Leia?
Too little short for a stormtrooper.
Huh?
In Mulan, that is, will Mulan be able to take her father's place in the army? At this point, you may be asking, what about the Death Star? What about the Huns? Well, when we say the central tension, we're talking about the dramatic question posed by the inciting incident. That's different from the third act tension at the end of the story. Luke Skywalker doesn't set out to destroy the Death Star from the very beginning. He doesn't even know it exists. Mulan doesn't set out to save China. She doesn't understand the scope of that danger until much later. So what is the central tension of our adventure? In a sentence, will our heroes be able to rescue Gundren Rockseeker? It is critically important for both your players and their characters to understand. This is what the story is about. After that, we want to consider what happens if they succeed and what happens if they fail. In other words, what are the stakes? Of course, Gundren's life is the main thing at risk, and if one of the player characters has a personal connection to him, that will certainly up the ante. But once Gundren is rescued, or, not, what is at stake then? The riches of the lost mine of Phandelver? Okay. We know that the villain is searching for the Forge of Spells, but so what? It's not that impressive anyway. This is a major weakness of this adventure, and it will be your responsibility to figure out what the heroes care about and put those things in danger. But that can happen during the middle of the story, as they meet
Old friends, new lovers, and the disabled.
The important thing is that the initial stakes, Gundren's life, is sufficient motivation for accepting the call to adventure.
I'm going on an adventure!
This marks the end of the beginning of the story, or, in a movie, the end of the first act. Mulan is quite quick to accept the call to adventure. She takes her father's letter of conscription, cuts her hair, and steals his sword and his armor. Luke, on the other hand, refuses the call to adventure.
You must learn the ways of the Force, if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help.
And this is a good lesson in what you can do if your players aren't sufficiently motivated by the main quest. There's nothing wrong with a little nudge in the right direction. But it's also worth asking if this is more of an in-game problem or an out-of-game problem. Part of the RPG social contract is agreeing to play the game that the DM has prepared. If you're not interested in the Lost Mine of Phandelver, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to play an adventure called The Lost Mine of Phandelver. This brings us to the middle, which, in a movie, would be the second act. It's at this stage that our heroes should begin making some progress towards their goal and encountering some obstacles and setbacks as well. In Star Wars, Luke and Obi-Wan make new allies, acquire transportation, and get in trouble. They pose as stormtroopers with Chewie as their prisoner and get in trouble.
Boring conversation.
conversation anyway.
But eventually, they find Princess Leia. In Mulan, she enters the army camp, passes herself off as male, and embarrasses herself. She meets her commander, begins her training, and embarrasses herself. But eventually, she wins her place in the army. Notice how all of this is 2 steps forward, 1 step back? That's how it should go in our story as well. Our heroes are able to uncover part of the villain's network in Phandalin, but the Red Brand leader Iarno most likely escapes. And now, he knows their faces. Our heroes meet someone in Thundertree who can help them find Gundren, but not before they get their faces melted off by a deadly green dragon. And eventually, they do find Gundren, in a castle brimming with bad guys and defenses. Before we get to Gundren, though, the middle is the part of the game where you want to let your players get lost in the weeds a little bit. Go climb that hill. Go seduce that necromancer. In D&D, we call these side quests. In filmmaking, we call it B-plot. It gives our heroes a chance to have a breather from the high-stakes main conflict, and it lets us build attachment to important NPCs. You know, so we can kill them later.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
Wyvern Tor, Old Owl Well, Coneyberry, and Thundertree are all mostly side quests. Don't be afraid to let your players do them all. And if it all sounds like a lot, well, it is. The middle should comprise about half your story. In filmmaking, the second act ends with what's called the second act climax. This isn't the final peak of your story, however.
I haven't even begun to peak.
The story isn't over, but there should be some resolution to the dramatic question posed by the inciting incident. In Star Wars, that question is, will Luke be able to rescue Princess Leia? And the answer is, yes. But the Empire has placed a tracking device on the Millennium Falcon.
They let us go. It's the only explanation for the ease of our escape.
In Mulan, that question is, will Mulan be able to pass herself off as male and take her father's place in the army? And the answer is, no.
A woman! Treacherous snake!
But Mulan can still save China. Notice how this is either yes, but something bad, or no, but something good. It's the same with our adventure. If the heroes successfully rescue Gundren, they should learn that his brother is still being held hostage. And if the heroes fail to rescue Gundren, or if he dies, they should still get the map. Or at least some other way of getting to the mine. The bigger the failure here, the bigger the lucky break they'll need to avoid giving up entirely. Once the central tension is resolved, the other threads should more or less wrap themselves up. For example, if the players still want to make the trek out to talk to Agatha, you can just have Sister Garail go, "Hey, I got that info I needed from another source. How's that search for the lost mine of Phandelver going?" That's not railroading. That's just good storytelling. Like, Luke doesn't go back onto the Death Star to finish off the garbage monster after escaping. And if you let your players run around doing a bunch of B-plot stuff after Cragmaw Castle, you risk undercutting the third act tension.
We're in the endgame now.
In Star Wars, the third act tension is, will Luke Skywalker be able to destroy the Death Star? In Mulan, the third act tension is, will Mulan be able to stop the Huns?
Boo.
In our story, the third act tension is, will our heroes be able to defeat the Black Spider and reclaim the lost mine of Phandelver? The resolution of that question should be the biggest and most dramatic moment of the story. It should be the climax.
And when I do peak, you'll know.
Before we continue, I want to clear up a particularly pernicious misunderstanding that has bothered me for a long time. In film studies, we are told that the climax happens in the third act of a 3-act movie. That makes sense. It's the end of the story. But in literature class, especially when studying Shakespeare, we are told that the climax also happens in the third act of a 5-act play. For example, we are told that the climax of Romeo and Juliet is when Romeo kills Tybalt. You know, halfway through the story. Even a high school student should be able to tell you that that's not true. The climax of Romeo and Juliet is very obviously at the end, when they,
I can't wait to read the ending!
I can't either! But I'm sure it turns out real swell. I bet Romeo marries his Juliet.
They have a baby
And make lots of friends. That's
probably the way the play ends.
when they make lots of friends. So why are we taught this misinformation about 5-act plot structure? Like usual, we can blame the Germans. As Janet Burroway explains in Writing Fiction, A Guide to Narrative Craft,
the 19th century German critic Gustav Freytag analyzed 5-act dramas and came up with a diagram of plot that has come to be known as the Freytag pyramid. Plot begins, he said, with an exposition, followed by the complication, or dénouement, the knotting up of the situation, leading to a crisis which is followed by a falling action, or anticlimax, resulting in a resolution, or dénouement, unknotting. The trouble with Freytag's useful diagram is that it visually suggests that a crisis comes in the middle of the pyramid shape of a plot, whereas even in a 5-act drama, the crisis is usually saved for the middle of the 5th act. And in modern fiction, the falling action is likely to be very brief or non-existent. Often, the crisis action itself implies the resolution, which is not stated but exists as an idea, established in the reader's mind.
in short, the climax of every Shakespearean play is at the end when the dramatic question is resolved. Just like in Star Wars, when the Death Star explodes, or like in Mulan, when the Shan Yu explodes, or in our story, when the Black Spider explodes, hopefully. The climax should feel big and dramatic, and it should feel like everything has changed. Whatever other encounters are left in the dungeon should be resolved narratively, or elided altogether. That might feel a little hand-wavy or a little quantum ogre-y, but ask yourself, how many movies have you seen where, after the big bad evil guy is defeated, the protagonists run around mopping up mooks for another hour? Don't undercut the impact of your climax. Once the main villain has been defeated, there's only one thing left. Dénouement is the fancy word for everything that follows the climax. It is the resolution where we tie up loose ends and, most importantly, we see how and why the actions of the heroes mattered. In Star Wars, Luke and Han get medals. In Mulan, we get,
Father, I brought you the sword of Shan Yu and the crest of the Emperor.
and
Would you like to stay for dinner?
Would you like to stay forever?
some stories, like Lord of the Rings or Spider-Man 2, have a longer dénouement. Like, a lot longer. And not every story has a dénouement.
Well, at least it didn't end like The Sopranos, where it just cut to black in mid-sentence.
But I promise you that your players want some closure. So unless you have a very good reason, you should give it to them. In the case of this adventure, I suspect your players may be interested in seeing how law and order are restored in Phandelver, the election of a new constable, the reconstruction of Tressendar Manor.
Psst, this would make a very good non-traditional quest reward.
And, last but not least, whatever becomes of the reclaimed mine of Phandelver. For those last two, the restored manor and the mines, check out the excellent maps by Morvold Press, link in the description below. The conflict set in motion by the inciting incident, that is, the kidnapping of Gundren and the fate of the lost mine of Phandelver, has been resolved, one way or another. This story is finished. So what comes next? Phandelver and Below, released in 2023, bills itself as a single adventure that includes the lost mine of Phandelver, as if it took the original story and expanded it. Like Stephen King's The Gunslinger, which began as a short story.
The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed.
And then was expanded into a novel that continued the story and resolved the central tension. Phandelver and Below, or more specifically, The Shattered Obelisk, is not that. It is a separate story with no connection whatsoever to Lost Mine of Phandelver. We know that because The Shattered Obelisk, the thing that story is about, is never mentioned until after the heroes reclaim the lost mine of Phandelver. If we're being generous, we can call it a sequel. But a good sequel is one that respects the growth and the decisions and the sacrifices of the characters that came before. The Shattered Obelisk begins with our heroes returning to Phandelver and finding it beset by a whole new conflict. There is no Dénouement. Rescuing Gundren, defeating the Black Spider, reclaiming the mine, all forgotten and never mentioned again. So if I can give you one piece of advice about the Shattered Obelisk, treat it as a sequel. Let a few years go by in-game. Let the heroes see the good that has come from their bravery. Let Phandelver grow. Let Phandelver prosper. And then, when they've seen how much they stand to lose, let Phandelver be threatened once more. To recap. The Lost Mine of Phandelver begins with the inciting incident, the kidnapping, and the theft of the map by goblins. Once the heroes have rescued Sildar, they should understand the central tension. Will our heroes be able to rescue Gundren Rockseeker and accept the call to adventure? In the middle of the story, they will make progress, suffer setbacks, go on side quests before, eventually, rescuing Gundren, or failing to do so. At that point, the tension shifts and a new dramatic question emerges. Will our heroes be able to reclaim the lost mine of Phandelver? Using everything they've learned, they will delve deep into the lost mine and confront the big, bad, evil guy, culminating in an epic climax. After that, there should be some dénouement, where the players get to see the consequences of their actions, particularly what becomes of Phandelver. If you run the Shattered Obelisk, remember to treat it as a sequel. Let some time pass. Respect what the heroes have accomplished. Those are the most basic plot points of an adventure story. And if you hit those beats, you will have told a good one. That's it for this video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Check us out over on Patreon if you want to watch our full playthrough of the Lost Mine of Phandelver. Remember that I believe in you, and the best thing you can do is fail and try again. I'll see you next time.